absolutely fine. I thank John for really setting me up well here. I've had several students who take his class and they say, that's the best class I've ever had. So now I see why. So my name is Sadie Hundemer. I'm an assistant professor in agricultural education and communication here at UF. And I was asked to talk about challenges with partnerships. And again, the prior session really set me up well. We really, of course, can't do any of these big things on our own. We partner with other groups and other people because we have common goals. But the way that we understand those goals, the way we approach them, are based on our experiences and our values and the way that we have seen that issue play out in the past. And because of that, we might misunderstand each other's approach. We might think we should do things in different ways. We may have different expectations about what our different partners are going to do and what our responsibilities are. And so, while your partners may be different than mine, I think we've developed some frameworks for understanding those communication challenges that might be useful across this room. I'm going to start off by talking about some of the collaborators that I've worked with. And I'm going to do this in the context of the Floridan Aquifer. I tend to work on regional projects, and specifically here a regional water project. And for those of you who are not from this area, this will also give you a little intro to Florida. So what we have here is the Floridan Aquifer. So the Floridan Aquifer, as you see in the picture, it's the brown and the blue areas. So it covers all of Florida and portions of the neighboring states. And our aquifer is a little different than some of the other aquifers that we have in the US. And that's because parts of it are unconfined, meaning that there is not a protective clay layer in our soil that prevents the water from going down. So in those blue areas, those are the unconfined areas. So in those parts of the state, the water from above can filter down into our aquifer system and refill it, which is great. It means that we have a very abundant water supply in our state. But there's also challenges in those areas because now anything that's applied to that ground can filter downwards into our aquifer system and contaminate our water supply. In those blue areas, we also have a lot of agriculture. So when we're looking for how do we improve our water quality, we tend to look to agriculture a lot. It also means that when we say, hey, we have some water contamination challenges, people tend to look to agriculture, which isn't really fair because we're all doing similar things. We're all reliant on that agriculture, but that's the way it tends to be looked at because of where ag is situated relative to these unconfined areas. But the Floridan Aquifer, it's really important to us. It's our primary drinking water source in this area. It supports this ag industry, enables us to be successful, and it also supports really unique ecosystems. I was talking to some people at lunch about what are our attractions around here. One of our attractions is springs, and that is the unique ecosystems that are made possible by this system. But among our big players in this system now, as I described, producers is one of them because they're really operating in that unconfined area, very heavy ag there, and they also are invested in having good water outcomes so that they continue to be productive in this region. Environmentalists also very interested in water here, particularly because of those ecosystems that are really unique, but also in maintaining health and collectively the prosperity of our state. So as we look forward to how are we going to develop solutions as our state population continues to grow and our water demands only increase, how do we get these two groups that both are really invested in this to work together towards solutions when in some ways they've kind of been set up into conflict? In fact, if you read like our local newspapers on regional water challenges, it tends to be set up as a conflict between these two groups. But really these two groups have so many similar needs in terms of the water quality outcomes. If we could have them working together, then we'd be in a much better place. So, well, like I said, they're always presented, or often presented, as in conflict, these two groups. And so I and other researchers on this topic have asked these groups, well, tell us what it is that you disagree on. And what they tell us really is kind of revealing. First of all, when we talk to producers, some of the things that they say are that, you know, those environmentalists, they think that we're not good stewards of the land. They think economics, they're not taking that into account. You know, it's not just about the water, we also have to make some money on this land. In fact, if agriculture isn't successful in those areas, you know what's going to be in there? Residential development, which is much worse for our water supply and all the things that we care about. I think environmentalist positions are extreme. And then when we talk to environmentalists, they're saying things like, well, producers prioritize their operations above the environment. And maybe some kinds of agriculture aren't really appropriate in this region, given that unconfined state. So what I'm going to kind of shift to now, and then we'll come back to our environmentalists and producers, is what's called the co-orientation model. This gives us a way to think about how they're thinking about each other. So let's start here. We can think about producers who have attitudes and beliefs and opinions about water, and environmentalists who have their attitudes and beliefs and opinions about water. Now, as I go through this, I'm giving you my partner groups that I want to think about, but you might think about your own and think about how they fit into this model. So they each are coming with their own attitudes and beliefs and opinions, and maybe those are similar, and maybe they're not. What they also have is beliefs about each other's views. So we have what producers think environmentalists think, and vice versa. And maybe they think they believe the same thing, and maybe they don't. That's what we're calling congruency here. Now, depending on whether they are right about that or not, we can think about accuracy. So with this framework in mind, we can think about some different combinations that might happen. One is that producers and environmentalists might be in agreement. They actually do think about water in the same way, and they know that they do. That's what we would call true consensus, and that's great. That's the state that we would love to be in. Here's another scenario. They don't agree about water, and they know they don't agree. Do you think that's good or bad? Yeah, great answer. I heard a good out there, and it is good. This is what we call dissensus. It's not as great as true consensus. Yeah, that would be the ideal state. But here, yeah, they disagree, but at least they know they disagree. They can talk through it and communicate and collaborate based on that understanding of each other. But where we could be is in this state of false conflict, where they think they agree, but they actually don't. If they understood that they actually see water the same way, they could be working together much more effectively. We could also have it happen where they don't agree and they don't know it, and they're a state of false consensus, which things might go well at the beginning, but the longer they go along in this partnership and they start to realize, actually, we're not on the same page, now they end up taking some steps backward. If they knew where they stood at the beginning, they would be in much better shape. So let's look at our producers and environmentalists and see what states they were actually in. So we asked them this, like, how concerned are you about water pollution and water availability in this region? And what we find is that both the producers and the environmentalists were really concerned. So if environmentalists thought that producers were not as concerned as them, the numbers don't show that. They're both very concerned. We asked, what are your priorities for water in the region? And what we find is that both groups put high priority on water for crops and water for springs and rivers and wetlands, those ecosystem components. So yeah, they were a little different in which was the highest priority, but they both thought if we have a limited water supply, we need to take care, the environmentalists are saying, yeah, we also need to take care about egg, and egg is also saying we need to take care of those ecosystems. So they really are coming from a similar place. Now, where they were in less agreement was this. How much of a problem do you think the following are in the region? And on those municipal things and ecosystem things, they were pretty similar. But when it came to questions of where agriculture has a negative contribution, that's where there was the difference. So going back to the priorities, seems like we have a false conflict going on. But when we come here to agriculture's role, now we're actually in a state of dissensus. So let's shift a little here before we come back again. So one way we can think about this is in the idea of mental models. So a mental model is a structure of someone's thoughts about how something works. And you can think of it as a small-scale model of reality. So you might have a mental model of how the cloud works. It might not be completely right, but it gives you some way to conceptualize it. You have a mental model of how COVID spreads. You have a mental model of your town and how it's laid out. You also have a mental model of how other people think. But mental models, like that thought of the cloud, are not complete. They are incomplete representations of reality. And when we have elements of that mental model that are not complete, we tend to fill them with our own assumptions. What feels right? What would make that story make sense? And then we fill in that piece. And what this does is it leads to misunderstanding and miscommunication. So you can think about, in my scenario with water challenges, maybe that one little fact down by itself is that we have a lot of agriculture in these areas. And then kind of we have these other facts that are, well, we have a lot of algae growing in our springs, and these problems are only getting worse. And so what we then do is kind of put together a little story of how these pieces fit together. And we add in a missing piece, which is, agriculture is doing the wrong thing, or agriculture doesn't care about our ecosystems. And we put together a little story that makes all the pieces fit together, but it might not be an accurate representation of what's actually going on in that other partner's mind. Now, we could think, well, what we need to do is just have these two groups spend more time together. The more time they spend together, they'll figure out that actually they are on the same page. And so we asked them, like, here we have their perception of their similarity of their water views by their level of interaction with people in that other stakeholder group. And for our environmentalists, the more that time they spent with producers, the more likely they were to think that, hey, we see things the same way. Producers did not think that at all. They, no matter how much time they spent with those environmentalists, they were still thinking, hey, I'm getting blamed for something that isn't really just my fault here. This is a bigger problem. So what we can think about is what's the type of communication that we actually need to bridge that gap. It's not just spending time together, it's certain types of communication that need to happen in order to bring us to a shared mental model and proper orientation towards each other's views. One of those is reflection. So you can help make stakeholders aware, and probably more importantly, yourself aware of thinking and reasoning processes, helping to distinguish between what's actually being presented, what's actually been going on. Has that other group actually said that they feel a certain way, or have you implied that? We can be active about this too. It's not just reflecting. We can engage in activities that create these joint learning processes to understand the thinking of other stakeholders. One of the things that we've done on this project that I'm describing is, and this was a very extended project. This ended up going over 5 years, so we had a lot of time with these stakeholders, which you don't usually have. But one of the things that we did very early on is we had them draw out their mental models of the connection between water and the regional economy. So both what are those ecological processes, and also what is going on with agriculture, what's going on with finances, what's going on with risk, and kind of put that all together to where they could see each other, kind of see into each other's brain and understand, oh, okay, now I understand why you're seeing it that way, and you can understand why I'm seeing it this way. And it's not that there is a right and a wrong. There can be two rights, and now we can understand where the other person is coming from, and we have a tool to talk about and help each other fill in properly those gaps in understanding. And finally, advocacy. We can be more straightforward and more expressive about presenting our own mental models. And finally, this is, like I said, this is a process that this group has been working on for a while, but being able to get to that place where they could come to a common understanding had made a humongous change over time. At the beginning of this project, when we would pull the stakeholders together, they would go to their respective corners of the room, and like when we'd have dialogue between the groups, it was tense. But over time, when we would meet maybe twice a year over 5 years, so it wasn't like they were seeing each other very often. But by the end of it, they would always go to try to find and sit next to the person from the other group, because they realized, oh, that's the person that can help me make the change that I want. I'm not just talking to the same people that I've always been with and that I already have on my team. Let's make those connections. And that's the power of bridging those gaps and recognizing where there is consensus. Thank you very much.